All right, welcome back and welcome to this special little bonus episode. In this little bonus episode, I will be interviewing the director of Eephus. Eephus was one of my favorite movies I saw last year at the New York Film Festival, and I've kind of raved about it ever since. The director, Carson Lund, of course, I will be interviewing him. But yeah, as you might know, if you have watched any other looks like a movie kind of pod or episode or anything like that, you might know that I don't normally do the intros. This is not a thing that I normally do, and I don't normally interview people. This is the first interview I'm going to do, and I've kind of approached this as less of like I want to be an interview and I want to interview a bunch of people, and more of like a filmmaker on filmmaker thing where I will be asking questions, and hopefully the questions I asked are good questions, but also the kind of goal for me was like, okay, I'm going to ask questions where it's like I want to know the answer to these things, and hopefully that will make for good questions and interesting conversation. So without further ado, here is my interview with Carson Lund, the director of Eephus. I'm welcoming director Carson Lund to the show. Great to have you on here.
Thank you.
Um,
Glad to be here.
this is your debut feature film as a director, and there's kind of this extra added bit of pressure on a debut film. This will be your forever be your debut feature film. Was there, why this film? Why Eephus? How did you decide that this was going to be your feature debut as a director?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really think of it as a debut, even though you're right. It
Yeah.
is. But I've been directing a lot of films over the years, mostly short films, and then DPing as well. I've DP'd 3 features prior to Eephus. So you know, I, sometimes and the nature of the cinematography work that I've done, it's been with
Yeah.
very close friends, and we've been very involved from a very early stage. Which is not to say I directed those films, but I just have had a long experience, kind of like seeing the crossover between the two different roles kind of play out. So uh, it didn't feel like I was stepping into some new terrain, well, to
Mhm.
direct this film, but nonetheless, I should approach it as a as a debut because it is.
Yeah.
So, with that said, yeah, I mean, I'd spent a long time trying to think about, what might my own vision be for a feature. I'm not someone who sort of voraciously writes screenplays. It's never been my forte.
Mhm.
I'm much more of a visual thinker. Um, I mean, I write quite a bit, but more so analytical writing, and
Sure. Yeah.
it took a long time for me to stumble upon something, and I've been a baseball enthusiast my whole life and a player,
Mhm.
and when I moved to Los Angeles, I had actually been away from the game for quite a while, and I moved to Los Angeles and joined a rec league team because I missed the game, and the weather was always so nice. It sort of was conducive to playing. So um, I spent years in that league, and just bit by bit, I sort of felt like this was a community that I knew really well. This rec league, kind of like amateur league community that I felt like hadn't been captured in a film in a way that I thought, did it justice. So that it sort of planted a seed joining this team, and it just kept growing and growing until I I really do thrive off collaborators, especially
Yeah.
with writing, the writing process. So I kind of I started to drop hints of this idea to my closest friends, and Mike Basta, my co-screenwriter, and a friend from home actually, and Nate Fisher, both became interested in this concept, and we decided. I don't, I'm always drawn to location and atmosphere, and I kind of knew I wanted to do something in a compressed timeline. So we very quickly we just kind of decided, let's do it as a single game. And no film really has done that. I mean, I think is it The Natural that kind of is structured around a single game, but it's full of flashbacks. So we wanted to do something that was more or less real time, and we got very excited by that idea, and sort of using the structure of baseball to tell a story. Um, yeah, and so it kind of all started from there and just got really exciting over the course of the year and a half that we wrote it.
You mentioned you being a DP prior, and you, of course, are not the DP of Eephus. Greg
Mm.
Tango is the DP, and Greg, to my knowledge, has never shot a feature before. And I was interested both why you decided not to shoot this film yourself, and why did you decide to go with Greg Tango?
Yeah, so I was actually for quite a while I was being stubborn and thinking that I could just go shoot this
Yeah,
myself,
yeah,
and I wanted to, but it dawned on me that the cast size was just so big that it's going to be a serious challenge to be able to juggle all the different responsibilities on set, and you know, running through the lines, coaching these guys through their performances while also kind of coaching them through the baseball action, the sports element of this. It was just there was so much to it
yeah.
that it just didn't seem feasible. So I I actually I'd asked another friend from college initially if he'd be interested in potentially coming on board. He told me he would be busy in the proposed window of time that we were going to shoot it. We ended up not shooting it at that time. We shot a year later, but in that process, this old friend of mine connected me with Greg Tango, who is also uh, kind of an acquaintance from Emerson College. We
Yeah.
hadn't really known each other well in college, but he was very close with some of my other friends, um, and came very highly recommended through all of them. I don't think that him not having shot a feature was at all like a demerit, because
Yeah.
I think you leave college and you kind of got to enter the workforce, and the money isn't really there with features, at
Mhm.
least not right away. So he's gone on to have a pretty prolific commercial career as a DP, incredibly gifted and intelligent and technically savvy DP. So I could tell just from his work, and I really the question was, can he adapt to this
Mhm.
fictional scenario? We had quite a few conversations. It wasn't as simple as, okay, I got a recommendation and now you're
Yeah,
hired.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was We had a lot of early conversations about the film and what I wanted to achieve. And then it was really solidified when I started showing him images from the field that I had taken. I started building kind of like storyboards out of those photographs that I had taken, which were kind of like sort of like a one-to-one relationship with the script. I basically shot the whole movie without people in it and then composited them in Photoshop. And we went through all of that together. And, basically by the time we were in production, I felt that we had a pretty strong shared language about what we wanted to achieve. And I gave him free reign to kind of go make that happen. Very pleased with the collaboration. Good friend of mine. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I overcame
yeah,
the at first it was sort of like it was nerve wracking, I would say,
yeah.
because I've
Do
always had that
you
control behind the camera, so it's hard to relinquish that. But
not to get too far in the future, but do you
mhm.
think in a future film you might see yourself shooting your own film?
Yeah,
Is
it
that
really
something you
depends on the
wanna do?
scale of it. Um, it really depends on the scale, like how many actors are there,
Yeah, yeah.
how many locations. There's so much about filmmaking that's just coordination and managing people and kind of being a leader.
Mhm.
um, and that can make it hard to make very tactical decisions about lighting and composition. I love, when I do that on Tyler Taormina's films.
Yep.
He has so much on his plate, and I'm kind of strictly focused on the image. So it's
Mhm.
very much a delineation of responsibility, and I can't. Ever since the films basically became bigger, which they're still very small, but um, the personnel grew. Like I've sort of split the responsibilities, so it's kind of tough to imagine at this point. But I did grow up like doing both,
Yeah.
or almost not even defining the roles. We just
Yeah,
making
just more
films in high school and
yeah,
just
just more
yeah, just
filmmaker.
exactly.
So you being a DP, you also have just been a film critic and a musician.
Mm,
And there's even, if I believe, there's songs that you wrote in the movie. And
yeah.
how has writing about film and writing music kind of shaped or aligned how you're as a filmmaker, how you're thinking about movies?
Yeah, they both have informed it in different ways. Film criticism I've always just seen as sort of like an outgrowth of the filmmaking in a way,
Mm-hmm.
just a way to like hone my taste and sort of pick apart the particulars of how a film is put together and how meaning is created. And you know, that really was where it came from. I mean, I was when I was kind of getting more and more interested in making films in high school. I was in the process of doing that. I was watching a lot.
Yeah.
I worked at my local library, which had a fantastic collection of DVDs, and I just had basically free reign over it. Um, yeah, during that period, I was trying to emulate my influences very, very directly through the films, but also through writing about them. Like just watching scenes over and over, and just kind of
Yeah.
understanding what makes a director a director. So it just was sort of like a compulsion, writing about films. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm using the past tense. I realize it's not that I'm done writing about films. I don't intend to be.
Sure.
It's just been too busy to do so. But
Yeah.
I really do think it's all part of the same growing brain
Mm-hmm.
that is trying to make films. You have to work through your other films and what you like and don't like about them, and um, what not even that. That's too simple. But like, what do you find valuable about different
Yeah.
choices being made? So that's very much a part of that. The music has always been an interest of mine. I've been in bands for many years. I don't. I just see it as another form of expression. That's
Yeah.
I do think actually that the kind of films we've been making with Omne's films, myself and Tyler and John Davies, that the movies that we've created together are all very, very informed by music, even if they're not always jukebox films or something. I mean,
Mm.
Eephus doesn't really have a needle drops per se,
Sure. Sure.
uh, but I think we're very informed by using music, like the way that music teaches you to think about things non-verbally, and kind of basing our movies around feeling and sensation, and tempo and rhythm is very
Yeah.
important to our editing. So yeah, I think just being in bands for years has just taught us to think that way. I initially conceived of Eephus as a movie without any score because I felt that the sounds of the field
Yeah.
and the banter, overlapping would kind of form its own soundtrack. And I was true about that in a way, or I was correct in a sense. But through the editing, through the editing process, it actually came about that I felt I needed something to sort of counter the energy from the field, to provide
Okay.
some sort of contrapuntal momentum. That became these drums this like very drum based score that we created, which was made by my brother and I. Um, my brother's always been in bands with me as well. So we did do a score for this. There's some dissonant saxophone in there as well, played by Mike Bosta, actually,
Oh.
and a little bit of harp in the mix as well. I was really looking for something you might not expect out of a
Yeah.
sports film. The drums are certainly kind of tinged with a military quality, which I thought was suitable for the name of the field, Soldiers Field. And I think these
Yeah. Oh yeah.
characters are kind of like soldier fighting against time in a way. But yeah, then the score itself, or sort of the diegetic soundscape of the film, is littered with songs played out of a boombox, many of which are just pulled from the archives. Songs we've made over the years, songs
Mm.
that friends have made over the years. There wasn't a big music budget, so um, yeah, that so it's sort of like top to bottom flooded with all this music that we've created.
The film starts, and one of like the kind of opening incidents is that they don't have enough players to play the game. They're missing a player. And
Mm-hmm.
later on, as the film goes on, and as the game goes on, kind of people come in and out, and then Bill Lee shows up, and people are
Mm-hmm.
leaving, and there's kind of this revolving door of this cast. And I was kind of thinking about, is that just a pacing thing, or like what is really the attention about that kind of revolving door element to the film?
Well, I think we sort of wanted to think about it as like the game is the structure, the field is the stage, and these people are just kind of passing through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It sort of derives almost more from like structuralist film than
Yeah.
narrative filmmaking. And I thought, the whole movie is about this march towards the end, and it's about various things disappearing. People, traditions, baseballs, light, um, until this gradual kind of like descent into darkness. Um, so I knew that it made a lot of sense to have these characters come and go,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes characters who felt maybe like they were emerging as sort of the fulcrum of the film would just suddenly drop out. And I think
Yeah.
as a for me as a viewer, I've always really enjoyed when a film kind of drops the bottom out from under you, and then you have to kind of reassemble the narrative in your head and kind of think through where this film might be going. That's always been very exciting to me. It's a little bit perverse, I realize, if you're looking at this film from a more traditional narrative uh,
Yeah.
perspective. But yeah, I mean, I think the loss of a character like Ed, who kind of
Mm-hmm.
emerges as a pretty central figure earlier in the film, I think it 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 actually raises the stakes. Makes all these. I think it makes it that much more poignant that everyone stays and kind of fights through to the end and tries to prolong it as much as possible,
Mm-hmm.
despite losing their leader. Despite later losing another character and all of pretty much all of the spectators. I mean,
Yeah.
the character Bill, his family leaves, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes it all just more touching that the people stay. So yeah, it was pretty um, established early on that we didn't want to have the whole ensemble there from beginning to end. It's more of like the film is structured around this big chunk of time.
In about like I think exactly a month from today, you're going to be introducing American Dreams: Lost and Found, the James Benning film at the Music Box Theater. And I definitely, when I first saw the film, I was thinking of Benning. I mean, especially there's like just shots of clouds, and then immediately I'm just going to go to James Benning with that. But on rewatch and with American Dreams in mind, the like little box score scenes or
Yeah.
shots with the photographs, it's very American Dreams.
Hmm.
And would you say that's a fair assessment to say that Eephus has some Benning influence there?
Absolutely. You know, I wouldn't even say it was specifically Lost, uh, or sorry, Lost and Found,
American
American
Dreams.
Dreams.
Yeah.
Um, I love the film, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that, yeah, you're right. That sort of tactile attention to baseball cards and score sheets is something that both films share. But really, his more observational, durational films
Yeah.
were certainly a guiding influence at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Those, the films he made, and also those of like Peter Hutton was someone I was thinking about as well. I know that the finished film doesn't necessarily scream durational avant-garde cinema by any means, but that's because it evolved quite a bit. I think the initial conception of it, before we really got deep into a script and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about all these characters, was like, I kind of think that, if I don't get a lot of money for this project, I think this is ultimately a landscape film. And it's about
Yeah.
two baseball teams going back and forth for a little while, and they're sort of, it's, the game is even more incidental. It's just like a camera almost kind of observing it,
Mm-hmm.
but from a distance, and maybe the trees are just as important as the people or the game. So you can kind of still say that about the film in a certain way, but
Yeah.
it definitely became very much more invested in the characters, I would say, which just came about as we had a lot of fun writing the film and then
Mm-hmm.
casting it, and I just
Yeah.
felt that I was doing it a disservice to keep the camera in this sort of like observational, detached mode.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the reason I love those films is because they give you so much freedom to roam, for your attention to roam, and I think baseball is a game that also does that,
Yeah.
that allows that, which I don't think means it's boring, as many people say. It's just a film that allows you to feel present. And I think those films do that as well. And Benning also was a baseball player, so there's certainly a similarity there. Yeah.
And then, I mean, of course, Fred Wiseman has a voice little role in the film, so it's very in that kind of world. And I mean, you already talked about structural filmmaking, but that's like it's very documentary in a way of the kind of the way that you're capturing everything. It feels like.
Hmm. Yeah, Wiseman is another legend, and a kind of spirit that guides the film,
Mhm.
because of his work. His work is just so it's so curious and so kind of, he picks a location or a community or some sort of ecosystem and
Mhm.
just sort of sees it from every single angle, and it's just this sort of restlessness, to his curiosity, and I wanted to do that, but in a more fictional context. So that's why he's ultimately
Yeah.
at the beginning of the film as a voiceover. Originally, I should add, he almost was going to be the character Franny, but it just didn't work out.
Mhm. Well, I think that's kind of what initially really grabbed me with Eephus, and I think Christmas Eve and Miller's Point has a similar element to it, where I mean we're talking about Benning and Wiseman, but the kind of content of the films, like a Christmas film and a baseball film, are films that you normally wouldn't maybe see the same formal attention to it, and there's kind of this clashing or an interesting combination of something that's not maybe traditionally formal, in Christmas movies and in a baseball movie. It's normally these kind of cheesy movie where you're selling the baseball rather than the movie. You're selling
Hmm.
kind of the content, and you already have that kind of pre-existing base of people who like baseball rather than people who like movies. And this is kind of you're almost both here. It's a movie for people who like baseball, but also it's just people who really like movies. Is there a level of approach of that of trying to I don't know. I think there is an interesting thing there with both Eephus and Christmas Eve and Miller's Point, where you are approaching subject matters that are not maybe traditionally approached in this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, we're trying to do a bait and switch necessarily.
Sure.
We're not trying to indoctrinate America to
Yeah, yeah,
uh, poetic cinema or formalist cinema. I mean, it's just the way. It's just what excites us.
yeah.
Uh, and we don't make these films are very low budget by
Mhm.
even by the standards of
Yeah.
independent cinema. And so we don't even make them with the expectation that we're going to find some massive audience.
Mhm.
Um, Certainly, it might have been in the back of our mind that, okay, we're touching on subjects here that have a broad appeal, um, and that might have some benefits for us, but that was just what we were just guided by, you know, our own
Yeah.
lives, our own history and experience. Yeah, and our own taste and sensibility and how we wanted to tell a story. But yeah, I mean, I'm still. I think Tyler and I are both still kind of reeling from having shown or premiered the film in Cannes. I think it
Yeah.
was certainly it's a North Star, like for any filmmaker. But I
Mhm.
think we knew that we were making films that had more of an international art house sensibility, perhaps, whatever that means. I think you can kind of,
Mhm.
everyone has their own understanding of that, but I think the language of the film is less Hollywood. So, and we've also done really well in international, like we've played in Chinese festivals, we've won awards in Chinese festivals, like
Yeah.
uh it's played all around the world, even to communities that don't have an understanding of baseball.
Baseball. Yeah.
I think the formal language is what's doing it there. It's kind
Mhm.
of it remains to be seen how the film actually performs in America. We
Yeah.
don't really know.
Yeah.
It could be received in a hostile manner. Who knows? I would say that we don't really think, we don't overthink the kind of audience and
Sure.
what they might think. I think we're just trying to make as honest a film as possible.
We brought up Christmas Eve and as well as Tyler and Omnis Films. If you, for people who don't know what that is, you just explain what Omnis Films is and how that came to be.
Yeah, it came to be in college, at Emerson College in Boston. Began with a small group of friends that made shorts together, for many years, made class projects together. Um, yeah, and then sort of blossomed with the production and then release of Ham on Rye in 20, I think 2018 or 19.
Mhm.
We made that film in 2017, and yeah, that was sort of where it became Omnes Films. I think it had just been called Omnes Productions prior to that.
Yeah.
But this group just kind of expanded piece by piece, and it's now basically a dozen members of very close friends. We all work on every film together. We
Mhm.
all kind of jump around to different roles. It's just sort of like an artistic collective, kind of a signature that we sign the films with. There's a logo. There's an identity, I think, that we've created. I think we just, coming out of film school, we realized that the odds were stacked against us,
Sure.
as they still are against young filmmakers, and that we would be stronger if we created some sort of collective identity around it. Um,
Mhm.
Branding, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so that's where it's at now. I mean, we it's been really amazing to see the name sort of spread, and
Mhm.
we've gotten a lot of great press in France, specifically around Omnes Films, which has been really cool. In Cahiers du Cinema, they did a big piece. Um, so yeah, it's been. We've also had to think deeply about about what it is and how it should evolve. As we've gained more attention.
Yep.
And specifically like the films that last year. Naturally, Tyler and I have had the spotlight a bit more, but it's
Mhm.
still this group, so
Sure.
it's led to a lot of conversations about what exactly it is. But definitely encourage everyone to watch all of the films we put out this year. We had and throughout the years rather, we had
Uh-huh.
two films that premiered, in other festivals this year. A friend, Lorena Alvarado from college as well, made a film called Los Capítulos Perdidos, which means lost chapters. And then Alexander Simpson, another friend of ours who's actually from Paris, but lives now in LA. She made a film called No Sleep Till that premiered at Venice Critics Week. Lorena's premiered at Fid Marseille, where we also screened, where we also premiered John Davies' film Topology of Sirens. So yeah, it's just like we're creating a body of work. I think there are similarities, but we sort of let the artist kind of guide the
Yeah.
film. It's not like there's a collective creativity.
Mhm.
It's not like we're forming the ideas together necessarily.
Yeah.
It's just about following the lead of our friends and the ideas that they come up with and trying to bring them to life as vividly as possible together.
So, Christmas Eve and Miller's Point released first, but I believe Eephus shot first. Is that correct? You shot Eephus first?
Well, they premiered at the exact. Oh, you mean theatrically? Yeah,
Theatrically, yeah, I'm talking.
yeah. Christmas Eve came out. Well, naturally, it should come out closer to Christmas. Uh, yeah, Eephus shot October 2022.
Mhm.
2022. Yeah, and Christmas Eve shot that following March. So I was actually in post production on Eephus and had to take a break and come shoot
Was it
Christmas Eve
weird at
Miller.
all directing a movie and then going and then being a cinematographer on a movie and kind of is that a weird kind of uh I don't
No, it
know.
was like an energy shift. No, it was just like the best time of my life. Really, it's
Yeah.
just extremely fun. And I was also editing Eephus, so it was really
Mhm.
just going from directing to
Very
editing
busy.
to cinematography. I mean, again, I see these roles as very fluid.
Mhm.
It's all just filmmaking to me.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it was fantastic to be able to have that run of productivity. Um, it meant that I didn't quite get as much prep on Christmas Eve as maybe
Mhm.
I would have liked, but the truth is that Tyler and I have been working together for a while and have a
Yeah.
real symbiosis. So it kind of worked regardless. And I did some scouting with him, and it all, you
Mhm.
know, he had been telling me about that film for years, so I kind of had a good sense of what it was.
I think someone who has never played baseball would have difficulty making Eephus, and I think it's safe to say not every filmmaker grew up playing sports, and there's definitely like an element of, for me at least, for growing up playing sports is like a part of who I was, especially at that time growing
Hmm.
up, and like who as I am as a human being, let alone just as an artist. And I'm interested, I guess, how growing up playing, in this case, baseball, related to you as an artist and kind of how you approached the film. And I mean, we talked about it a little earlier about how you the directly, but I guess how you are as an artist as that.
Yeah, you know, I really, when I was in high school, I really hated films like The Breakfast Club because of
Yeah.
how they seem to propose that everyone has to fall into a certain clique. And obviously, the
Mhm.
point of the film is just to be like, well, actually, it's everyone's original and
Yeah.
somewhere in between. And but I truly felt that I was in between. I
Mhm.
played on the baseball team. Eventually, kind of grew alienated from that world and um, got more into filmmaking and music. But I sort of always was somewhere in between these different spaces.
Mhm.
Uh, and I didn't feel entirely at home in the athletic community, but I was a good athlete, so
Yeah.
I always had to reckon with that. And I don't think I was also very put off by the kind of knee jerk antipathy towards sports within the arts community and within the theater community. And I understand it because those communities can be kind of toxic when
Yeah.
you're young and it's full of peacocking and
Sure.
dick measuring and all sorts of crap. But I just I feel that there is so much beauty in sports, and sometimes filmmaking itself is like athletic. You have to be in shape to go out there and
Mhm.
stand on your feet
Sure.
for that long and hold a camera. And yeah, it's uh it's I mean it's you need to everything needs to be engaged to create great art, body, mind,
Mhm.
spirit. um yeah, I don't know, I've played baseball forever. I think my understanding of the way that people communicate on a team and in a competitive context, specifically when the region that I shot this film and where I grew up, uh, that all informed the movie.
Yeah.
That's the reason I made the movie. I wanted to explore, what it means for people to form bonds around a sport. Is it any less? Um, is it any more shallow because it's just through a sport, or is it actually like deeper in a
Mhm.
way because everyone's sort of tapping into something that is joyful and almost childlike? I find that very touching, especially as you get older, and you try to hold on to these things even as your body is
Mhm.
withering away. uh, yeah, so you know, I I think that sports as a subject within cinema or within art in general is often denigrated as sort of like beneath
Yeah. Yeah.
the highbrow mind. Um, but I don't really see any kind of problem with depicting it. And I it was I think part of that frustration with that mentality is what led to me wanting to make Eephus and
Mhm.
make it exactly the way I wanted to make it and make it prickly and slow and strange and unorthodox, because to show that there's more to it than just
Yeah.
sports are for boneheads and
Yeah.
you know the high and the low, the high low mix I think is really important to myself and Tyler as well, and really everyone in our group. We don't really see as major distinction there.
Mhm. There's definitely like a team aspect to the way, especially talk about the collective, but even just making a film, there's a lot of collaboration, and I mean leadership qualities are definitely
Yeah,
important on set, and
that's a
in.
good point. No, it is really, it's a team effort just like it is in sports. Everyone's trying to you know reach a collective goal.
Mhm.
um, and everyone has to fill sort of different roles within that team and you kind of, there's a performative aspect of it too. You
Yeah.
know, on a baseball team, there's people who knowingly or not like fill archetypes and create a different personality than they have in their daily life. You know, so I certainly wanted to explore that as well in the film.
Mhm. The film is definitely an ensemble piece, and the performances themselves really bring everything together. The When I first saw it, the actors had this quality of I kept being like, where have I seen these people from, and where have I seen them before? And maybe it's because of growing up in Mass, and there's definitely like a Massachusetts quality to a lot of the performances, and but there's almost this like veteran nature to a lot of them, and even I know I saw Keith William Richards in Uncut Gems, but I was actually surprised because I was like, oh, he's had to have been in all of these films because he has this kind of veteran nature to him, and even other people like Cliff Blake and Steven, and then there's a level of like they have this veteran quality to them, and I guess I'm asking and kind of I wanted to bring up like how did you get this kind of bring this group together, and how difficult, especially on a budget, was it to create this great ensemble cast, and I guess what were you
Mm-hmm.
looking for when you were casting? What was something that you were looking for in these people? Because I think they do have an energy that does kind of go together in this collective way.
Just to be clear, when you say veteran, do you mean like military veterans or
No,
like they've been
more,
around the block?
yeah, more of like they've
Yeah,
been like they have this
old
kind of
character actors, you know.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, either way, actually, I think it's suitable for the film. But yeah, I mean, I was looking for the kind of face that I feel like has just disappeared from
Hmm.
modern cinema,
Yeah,
at least American cinema. I think it was way more prevalent in like the 70s,
yeah,
independent cinema in the 70s, you know, John Cassavetes films, Elaine May, you know, so many great filmmakers who, like, I think about like people in the movie Wanda, you know, I was like,
yeah,
I need to try to capture that and bring that back because there's
yeah,
people,
yeah,
they exist in America and I grew
yeah.
up with them, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it was sometimes like picking a needle out of a haystack, you know, going through hundreds of submissions to try to find the faces that felt really distinct and really
Hmm.
lived in and that tell a story without, you know, them even having to say anything.
Hmm.
That's what I was looking for, and myself and Mike, who helped me cast this film. Um, so that's what we were looking for when we were on actual casting websites. But then there were also people that I'd worked with before, like Cliff Blake.
Hmm.
I've been working with him since high school. And Keith William Richards is someone who's become a very close friend, but I didn't know him at the time. And I saw him in Uncut Gems, and I said, this guy has to be in something that's where he's not just trying to kill someone.
Yeah.
Because he's such an incredible face, and so the eyes are just so penetrating.
Mm.
So yeah, I that's really what I'm drawn to is like the essence of a person, their presence, and you know the acting skill, quote unquote, sort of it's important, but it almost feels secondary to me because I
Sure.
think I had this sense, maybe foolishly, that we'd get everyone together and they'd all be on a baseball field together, and the any sort of self consciousness would wash away. Um, I was mostly true in that assumption, actually. Um, yeah, I think when they spent more time together, the kind of like the stiltedness of some of the early rehearsals definitely um, dissipated, and I think there's something therapeutic about being on a baseball field or just being outside and laughing and
Yeah.
playing around. That makes kind of the frightening gaze of the camera feel less frightening. Um, so yeah, I mean, there were times where I picked certain actors and I felt okay, maybe there's more work to do here,
Hmm.
but ultimately this is such a collective film and so
Yeah.
few probing close-ups. You know, this is like people are often in the frame with six other actors
Sure.
that it takes that pressure off. that I felt confident that, I just got to find people whose face and voice I like and who have some experience with this game.
Mhm.
That was very important. Sometimes it was just a matter of saying, okay, you know the rules.
Yeah,
You watch
you
baseball.
yeah, yeah. You've heard
We'll
of it
work
at
on
least.
the
Yeah.
we'll work on the athletic part, but I needed people who understood how things worked. So yeah.
What was there a lot of you mentioned rehearsals. Did you do a lot of was there a lot of rehearsing?
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, we didn't have enough budget, frankly,
Yeah,
to do
sure.
as much as I would have liked. But the rehearsals were kind of like baseball practices. I got everyone together on a field and we'd
Mhm.
do drills. I would sort of do, we would eventually get to some scene work at the end of the rehearsal, but it was like really trying to like
Yeah,
get people comfortable, kind of break down those defenses a little bit, and just get them familiar with the gestures of playing baseball and how it works, how the body feels when you do it. So yeah, there was I can't remember how many we had, but
Mhm.
that was really important and just kind of laying the groundwork for that team spirit. And then really, I think the ultimate victory was having almost everyone, live together uh, for while on set. They all shared a cabin in the woods, like 30 minutes from the field, and
Mhm.
you know, miraculously didn't butt heads very much. And really, it strengthened those bonds, and it became like an actual team through the course of the shoot. So I kind of picked up on that pretty early, and by week 2, week 3, week 4, really, we would get into some of the deeper dialogue scenes because I felt like really people were cooking at that point.
Mhm.
Um, so it was almost like emphasizing some of the action first, or kind of like the
Sure.
scenes that are quote unquote less difficult to pull off or less lines to
Yeah.
memorize or whatever. So
With kind of a wide range of baseball skill, and you're talking about how difficult was it to choreograph? There's a lot of moving parts with everything going on. Like there's scenes where they're pretty long takes where a lot of different moving things are happening. Is that something you got to do a bunch of different times or?
yeah, that was the luxury that we tried to provide ourselves with the scheduling and with the timeline of the shoot in general, and just sort of how we structured it in terms of having the actors there for the whole month. Uh, yeah, the luxury being
Mhm.
long takes, a lot of time we devoted to some of the trickier scenes. So we would do you know 30, 40 takes sometimes.
Oh
uh,
wow.
just because it was just about getting the right kind of balance of chaos within the frame.
Hmm.
I wasn't worried about sloppy play. I was worried about people not looking like they knew what they were supposed to be
Sure.
doing. You know,
Yeah.
there needed to be a lived-in quality to, okay, the shortstop goes here for the cutoff, or the shortstop backs up third, or something.
Uh,
They need to look like players who know all the rules, not like they're
yeah, they just
scrambling
learn.
around in an uncertain way. So yeah, I mean, I really wanted to show how the different bodies interact,
Hmm.
um, spatially, in a wide frame, because I think so many baseball films are about chopping up the action into montage. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, I mean that some of the proudest moments I think of directing were those sequence shots where you see an entire play develop, and yeah, it's sloppy, it's kind of a mess, but it's like that's when I would basically move on to the next scene when I knew I had a sort of the perfect sloppiness, the kind of graceful
Yeah.
comedic sloppiness. Yeah.
I've seen you talk about this a few times, and every time I'm like, this is kind of really crazy, and like really director brain stuff. And when you're talking about like the importance of the sun and where the sun was at all different times, and how
Mhm.
important was that to you, and how was you achieve the getting the sun where you want? I mean, you can't get it where you want it,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Well, it's all scheduling. It's
yeah.
all that work is done ahead of time. I just spent a lot of time at the field,
Hmm.
ahead of time, and taking pictures and everything, just observing how the sun fell on the field at different times and how it was shaded, what parts of the field were shaded, um, it was interesting because we didn't really get a true sunrise or sunset. The sun went behind the wood, the large trees, a few hours before it was actually dark. So, and same for when it came up. So we never really were able to get that true magic hour feeling. That's just true. That's just the nature of shooting in kind of like a New England suburb. There's just so many trees
Yeah,
and
yeah.
houses that block that view, and hills as well. But yeah, felt like I had to really grasp all of that before we could feel confident scheduling the film. Because for me, one of the key impressions I want the viewer to have is a sense of actually spending a day with these people and feeling the sun go down in a way
Mhm.
that it happen the way it happens every day, right? And I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
we take for granted how beautiful that is, and we don't always get out there and just enjoy that passage of time as the sun goes down. And I think, like I said, in suburbs in New England, it's sometimes not as apparent. But like I moved to California 10 years ago, and I go camping a lot, and I this is like such a sacred thing, like just watching the sun go down and just being present for all of that. So I wanted that feeling imparted in the film. So like, and not just that, but like the entire afternoon, that you feel it creeping slower and or lower and lower rather. Um, so yeah, Greg and I just spent a lot of time thinking about that, and just and then observing how the time of the sunset was getting earlier and earlier as we got later into October. So our shoot days got shorter and shorter as well, bit
It's
by bit. But yeah,
it's also it's very thinking about it, it's very conversational with like durational cinema, and it's like I think it's like I feel like it's like Warhol or something, where it's like you're this slowly just seeing the time and the sun go down
yeah,
and the changes. Like very, there's something about that that's very similar to a lot of like
yeah.
durational cinema, where you're just seeing
I,
the changing of the
I
time.
wanted that, but not with this kind of
Yeah.
like machine like observation. I wanted to
Hmm.
like fold it very neatly into a narrative action that's happening, um, and that was extremely tough, especially on Mike Basta, who also was the AD of the film, and just all of the impromptu changes we needed to adapt to,
Yeah.
because of the weather and how the clouds were changing and rainy days, and every night basically was like a new scheduling session
Hmm.
after we thought we had perfected the schedule early on. Of course, by day 3, it was all thrown out of whack.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's important to me. I mean, like I love Terrence Malick, for
Hmm.
instance, but he's and people have compared parts of this movie to Malick, but I really don't think it's actually similar. He's really after a certain aesthetic beauty all the time,
Yeah.
sort of verisimilitude be damned. I think he often would like Lubeski would talk about Tree of Life and how like they wanted to have backlight in a shot reverse shot scene for both actors. So like we can shoot both actors at magic hour like a day. We'll shoot them a day later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that results in a very pretty film. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way
Sure.
with him, but I was okay with if this character's backlit, the other character has sun beating down on his face, because I wanted that feeling of actually being there at the field.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
I mean, there's almost in the talking about Warhol and Benning, there's and the difference where it's like you're it's different, more difficult because you're manufacturing and you're bringing multiple days together and making it trying to feel like one day. Where in a kind of traditional durational sense, it's just capturing real time. So you're trying to create real time or the feeling, I guess, of
yeah,
how it would change like that.
yeah, yeah, and it's really not. Of course, it's not actually real time.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and the script began as a longer game
Hmm.
and an attempt to account for out, every unit of time within a baseball game. And as we edited, we had to realize we had to come to terms with the fact that some things were just that the kind of like conceptual or structuralist components of the film were sometimes at odds with the narrative
Yeah.
qualities. So we had to keep it moving, and I ended up breaking some of my rules, but hopefully in a way that doesn't make it feel any less real time.
Mhm.
But there was, I'll just say, there was like a 2.5 hour cut
Oh,
at one
okay.
point.
I mean, we talking about these structural films. Was there any actual baseball movies that served as inspiration? I feel like I don't know a lot about baseball movies, but were there any that you looked back at or were influenced by when making the film?
No,
Yeah.
we kind of deliberately didn't look at baseball
Mhm.
films as
Yeah,
influence. We wanted to kind of approach this with a kind of
totally.
blank slate,
Yeah.
you know, just to try to create as original a baseball film as
Mhm.
possible. It's true that there ended up being some allusions to other films, including Field of Dreams,
Mhm.
especially with the way the characters come in and out of the woods. That wasn't really intentional. It just kind of happened. I think it's just a testament to how baseball films are sort of just part of the cultural imagination. They just seep in without you actively thinking about it. So yeah, we deliberately avoided that. It's not that I think they're bad films per se. They were just,
Yeah.
most of them are just doing something very different, using the game as a vehicle for something else.
Mhm.
So yeah.
I I feel like anticlimactic is like a bad word or the wrong word, but I feel like there is this part of the film where okay, it's the last game, it's the last like the final thing, and there's a great kind of meaning to this final send off, and at the beginning there's already like okay, there's kind of fireworks at the end, and there's almost they didn't want to let go, and then the end of the film is when it most kind of feels like Goodbye Dragon to me, where it's very quiet. And I remember when I first saw it and they mentioned the fireworks, I was like, oh, I'm expecting this big like Brian De Palma blowout sequence at the end, but there's almost this like sad way that it ends, and I was just thinking, I wanted to ask about the intentions of that feeling that you were kind of getting at there.
Yeah, anticlimax is a fine word. I love anticlimax in cinema. uh, it feels more authentic to me. It feels
Yeah.
like life.
Hmm.
It's not that I'm a pessimist. I just think we often have these outsized expectations for how things might culminate in some revelation or bliss or something, and it usually doesn't work out that way. It's more, the revelations are smaller, quieter, and more gradual.
Hmm.
um, I mean, there's no way to, I, I think that the I think it is a genuine tragedy to lose a field like this. If that it is this sort of a place with history, and it's a place where a ritual was conducted, and where people formed bonds based on that place. But it's not that big of a tragedy, you know.
Sure,
The
sure.
truth, the real tragedy, more so, is I think that the failure of these men to like figure out some new outlet for this attachment that they have.
Yeah.
Um, they could just go play 30 minutes away, but I think I want it. I find it both funny and kind of heartbreaking that that there's it's something about the suburban mind that is so locked into kind of a rhythm and a routine that 30 minutes feels like the biggest stretch, of attention in the world. To have to change up that routine is so difficult. And I think, I mean, that was what I wanted to explore in the film, this kind of stunted or
Hmm.
repressed masculinity, and the difficulty that it often is for men to form close bonds that aren't related to some extracurricular thing,
Hmm.
often sports. um so I I felt like there was no no like hoorah way for this movie to
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
And so the kind of the whimper of it all was there from the very beginning. And I think many people will relate to it. I think not just men. I think the truth is that a lot of things in our lives end without fanfare. even if they began with fanfare and they began with a lot of hope and excitement. I think time makes fools of us all. Maybe this sounds like very very pessimistic, but I don't want the movie. I don't want the ending to feel purely pessimistic. I think like
Yeah.
the note of hope is there in a character like Franny, who's has all of this memorabilia from all these games. He has this history recorded, and for him that is so meaningful. To have these box scores and to have witnessed it at all in the first place. I think is they'll all go on to do something else.
Mhm.
It's not the end of the world, but it is the end of one world.
Yeah, I think there's a line somewhere in there where someone says like, "Is it really going to end this way?" There's like, almost this like disappointing reality to all of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So Music Box acquired the distribution rights. I wasn't aware that they distributed films. The theater in Chicago. How did this end up happening, and how did they get
Mm.
involved in here? Because I think even people, I feel like I have a friend who goes there all the time, and he didn't even know that they did this.
Yeah, no, I can't remember how long they've been doing it, but they've been a player in the independent film distribution scene for a while now. Um, they just picked up A Familiar Touch um, by Sarah Friedland, which was another film that was touring kind of the festival circuit this year. Um, Sarah's a friend; she's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that they've been doing a great job just picking up films that might have been neglected by other distributors, not pulled in by the big players in the
Yeah.
space. And they're not overly concerned with let's have a real strong identity to this group of
Hmm.
films. They're just kind of like picking films they love. That's my sense of it, at least. And I
Cool.
think that's a very you know respectful thing.
Yeah.
Um, at this point in time. So, I mean, it just how did it happen? It came on the heels of Cannes. I mean, we had a sales agent in Cannes, and they pitched the
Hmm.
film to everyone, and we got a lot of interest and a lot of passes, nonetheless, because the market is very precarious at this point. So, they've been a great partner, Music Box Films, that is, and I'm very grateful that they picked up the film and took a chance on it because many other people were passing, considering that it had no feeling like it had no commercial viability,
Hmm.
despite the subject, which I think,
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
I
you
would.
could go around and say this film is like, Sandlot for adults.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science,
Yeah,
but
no, it feels like a pretty easy pitch to. It's a movie about baseball. I
well,
think.
this is how risk averse this industry
Yeah.
is right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, people are afraid of that everything. So,
So we talked about starting shooting in October 2022. You even wanted to shoot earlier, and now it's February when we're recording this 2025. You did festivals last year. Now you're kind of doing the tour of releasing it. Oddly enough, I feel like I when I'm thinking about okay when I'm working on a film after editing it, I'm like I don't want to look at it anymore. Like I'm done with it. Is there a and this is a weird question to ask in an interview, but I is there almost like a you're ready to kind of move on to the next thing? Is there almost or you're still like it's my baby. I can talk about it forever, or are you kind of ready to move on to the next? Because I can't imagine talking about it forever. You know?
I'm I don't mind doing the press circuit and talking
Sure.
about the film. It's exciting to me, and it's getting a little exhausting,
Yeah.
maybe. And
No.
we'll see how this next month treats me.
Mhm.
But yes, I am very much ready to move on, and I want to be working on my next film. I mean, I am when I have
Okay.
time, but yeah, it's just like the reality of the scene now that you have to be a
Yeah.
spokesperson. You have to preach the gospel of your film to as many people as possible. You have to be present and visible all around the festival circuit because it's so hard to get these things to sustain within the culture. So I recognize that it's just a kind of necessary part of the process. I consider myself fairly good at it. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it does seriously limit productivity, and
Yeah.
that's a real problem that independent filmmakers have to deal with, is like, well, how do I do this for a living if I can't even focus on the next project, and I'm not even making anything on this one, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a challenge, but I don't know. It's so deep in my bones at this point. It is my baby, and I can freely talk about it. I'm never really stumped by a question. So, I don't mind doing it, but yeah, time to move on at the same time. It's a conflicted feeling.
Yeah. All right. Well, we could end on that note. The
Yeah.
film
Come
will,
see Eephus.
yeah,
Come see me in a conflicted state on stage, wanting to write up my new film, but worrying about this. Just kidding.
it
I'm
it
very
will
excited.
be select theaters March 7th. Is that correct, or what's
Yeah, well,
the?
March 7th in New York. Other cities to follow. I think
Okay,
LA the following week, and then Chicago the
mhm,
following week, and Boston is the middle of March as well.
cool.
And then a whole bunch of smaller markets as well. Music Box has done a great job with that. I think it's depending on how it sort of fares in New York,
Mhm.
it may spread even wider. We'll see. So just go see it. Support
Yeah.
independent
No,
cinema.
I know we have a lot of viewers very excited for the film that are anticipating it. So,
Excellent.
all right.
Well,
Well, thank you, thank you for coming on. This is great, great talking to you.
thanks a lot. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.